Hello friends and welcome back to Generation Pixel, and if you're new to the channel, well, you're about to experience another The Worst Game Ever episode, where I take a game that is not just a bad game, and I do like a bad game, but is truly the worst game ever. And the distinction between a bad game and the worst game ever, well, it's simply fun. And if you want to see why I think this game coming up is the worst game ever, then you just wait until after these. Now, before you fill the comments with hate, I'm not saying Double Dragon is the worst game ever. Well, not all Double Dragons are the worst game ever, because obviously the arcade port is the granddaddy of all brawler beat 'em ups, and there was some wonderful ports to other systems such as the Sega Mega Drive, the Master System, and even the humble ZX Spectrum. But there was one port in particular that, well, let's just call it the worst game ever, and that port was for the Atari 2600, and I'm about to show you just how bad this little port truly is. So obviously, to get the best and truest opinion in this game, it's got to be original hardware and original software. Now as you boot it up, you can see it's Tecmo and Activision. Now Activision were killer back in the day. They were one of the truly great video game developers. So when you get your hands on Double Dragon, an arcade classic, it's done by Activision, you're expecting something special, and instead, this is what you get. And yes, you're probably looking at the character figures here and thinking, well, that's not too bad for the Atari 2600. And you'd be right, it's not too bad, but where the problems lie are not so much in the graphics, because even the background looks okay. It's where it really counts that this game is lacking, and that is in the gameplay. A big part of what made Double Dragon the classic that it is a high-paced frenetic gameplay where you would have your player or even two players pitted against the enemy sprites who could attack you from all directions. With the Atari 2600 however, it's one-on-one all the time, which yes, of course, might make it seem a little bit easier, but when you take into consideration the hitboxes, which seem to be non-existent, and unfortunately the very clumsy control scheme in this game. Now you do have to remember you're using the Atari joystick to play this, which wasn't a great joystick by any stretch of the imagination. But of course, when the enemy sprites can pull off so many different moves and catch you out so many different ways, and you as a player can barely get off one hit or one kick, well, things become a tad frustrating really soon. And then of course there's the game's music, which starts off quite strong. It's not too bad at all, but then it loops over and over and over again, and before long it becomes that little earworm that will stay with you not only all day, but through every moment of the night when you're trying to sleep. And the longer you play it, the graphics also start to take their toll on your senses. Yes, as I said, the character sprites are fantastic for the 2600, but what's that huge brown Skeletrix track spewing out a Germany flag at the top all about? So when you combine this selection of assaults on your senses into one great big travesty, well, it's obvious this is not a good game. And that is an absolute crying shame, considering both that the developers were Activision, the geniuses behind Pitfall, and the source material was the wonderful Double Dragon. Now in all fairness, this is probably just an example of the little machine that couldn't, but when it comes to video games and the amount of money you had to part with back in the day especially to pick up these games, then you just can't settle for these subpar games, and that's what this is, a subpar game. And if there's anything that's good that's came out of this video, it's probably the fact that I've played this, shown this to you, so you don't have to play it yourself, because quite frankly I would rather have open heart surgery while being fully conscious than playing this torture device of a game. And with full sincerity, I hope that you came to the same conclusion too. And despite being a bad game, it's still a game, so it deserves a rating, and this game's gonna get a massive, and wait for it, 2 out of 100. Let's end this madness here, shall we? So there you go my friends, that's Double Dragon on the Atari 2600. And does it deserve the title Worst Game Ever? Well, that's purely personal and up to you, but for me, it definitely makes it onto that list, and that's why it's here on this particular series of videos that I started with the Flintstones, and hopefully have many more to come to torture your eyeballs with some awful games. Now if you want to talk about this carbuncle of a game, then drop that down in the comments, because let's face it, The interaction between you and me is what makes YouTube special, and it certainly makes these worst ever video games episodes special. Thank you as always for watching, and until next time, cheerio!